On July 26, 1992, 22-year-old Brenda Gail Lambert hosted a birthday party at her home in Bluewell, West Virginia. It was her youngest child's first birthday, and the house was filled with family, including Brenda's estranged husband, Raymond. As the night wore on, tensions rose, and guests began to leave. Hours later, Raymond showed up at Brenda's sister's door and he was visibly shaken. He stated that he could not find Brenda. More than 3 decades have passed, and Brenda has never been found. But her family is still searching, and they believe they may know what happened to her and where she might be. Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. So first off, before we dive into this week's case, I'm feeling much better, so thank you to everyone for all your well wishes in the comments and in my DMs. I really appreciate it. I finally feel like myself again. And also a big thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch America's Most Wanted Missing Persons this last Monday. The early numbers are that it was a huge success, and I also was interacting with a lot of you on social media, and I appreciated you using the hashtag America's Most Wanted and interacting with me. It's great to see that a big network like this is taking an interest in these unsolved cases, specifically missing persons. I put a whole video about it. I'll spare you the details here, but we really have the opportunity to make this show a success, and I hope that we continue to do that. The show will be back this week, this Monday. I will not be on it. I'm actually heading out for surgery, but I will be back the following week. So please go over, support the show, watch it on Fox, watch it on Hulu. Make sure you're using the hashtag. Let's make sure that this show continues on and that all of these cases we talk about and these families that are looking for these answers, they all get the coverage that they're seeking and deserve. All right, so this week's case, Brenda Lambert. This is another one of those investigations where a lot of you are going to deduce what happened here. You're going to have a very strong opinion on it. But the reason we're covering it is because it's another one of those cases where we're going to find ourselves asking, how do we get it over the finish line? How do we find Brenda? How do we determine what happened to her? And how do we hold those who are responsible for what happened to her accountable? So we're going to talk about the case, what can still be done today in 2025, and what direction I feel like the prosecutors in this case could potentially take to maybe bring charges against someone after a search warrant or two. So there's a good amount to cover. I want to dive into it. So let's get into this week's case. Brenda Gail Christian was born on December 26, 1969 in Williamson, West Virginia. She came from a large family that included 6 full siblings and 6 half-siblings from her father's first marriage. When Brenda was 8 years old, her younger sister Christy was born. Christy, who we worked with on this episode, said that Brenda quickly became like a second mother to her. She described Brenda as fun, outgoing, feisty, and mischievous. She had a big heart and loved spending time with her family, doing their hair and makeup. Brenda was also a bit of a tomboy. She wasn't afraid to get dirty and loved climbing trees. When Brenda was 16, she met her brother's co-worker Raymond Lambert, who was 4 years older than Brenda. The two began dating, and at first, the family was happy for Brenda. No one had any concerns about Raymond, and things seemed to be going well. That would later change. Not long after they got together, Brenda became pregnant with their first child. They welcomed a daughter named Krista Dawn, and Brenda was overjoyed. Even though she was young, she took to being a mother right away. She and Raymond got married and eventually had a second child, a son. Now, I'm not going to say his name because he has never spoken publicly, so out of respect for him, I'm going to keep his name internal. I don't think it really matters for the purpose of the story anyways. I just wanted to make sure you guys know why I was specifically referring to him as a son and not actually saying his name. There's no disrespect behind it. Now, the couple settled into a home off Route 7, also known as Windmill Hill Road in Bluewell, West Virginia. Brenda stayed home with both children, a role she loved more than anything in the world. Christy told Missing People in America that on the surface, Brenda and Raymond seemed to have a good relationship. But that all changed in 1992 after Raymond began having an affair with Brenda's cousin, Tammy. For quite some time, both Raymond and Tammy publicly denied the relationship, but everyone knew what was going on, including Brenda. Still, she didn't want to leave Raymond. She wanted to keep her family together. But then, according to her sisters, things took a dark turn. Raymond became violent, and he started choking Brenda, something that happened more than once. Her sisters saw the aftermath, and they would say that Brenda would show up at their houses with black and blue eyes and red rings around her neck. They tried to comfort her and urged her to leave Raymond, but Brenda didn't want to just pack up and go. She had 2 young children, and she wanted to end things the right way, through the court system. Then, on or around July 7th, Raymond physically assaulted Brenda yet again. This time, she filed a restraining order against Raymond, and a warrant was issued for his arrest, but for reasons that remain unclear to this very day, he was never taken into custody. Now, I'm not blaming law enforcement here. I don't know what transpired. I don't know if Brenda came back in and spoke to police and dropped everything. I just want to relay the information as I have it. I don't know if it would have affected the outcome of where we are today, but I want you to have everything that I have. Now, even though Raymond wasn't taken into custody, he did move out of the house and went to stay with his parents, who lived on a 200-acre property in the mountains. But just 2 days after filing the restraining order, Brenda told her mother that Raymond found her, beat her, and held a weapon to her head, and then forced her to call and drop the restraining order. So I tell you this because when we're asking the question, why was he never brought into custody, this could be the explanation. We don't know what she was forced to say. Did she call law enforcement because she had a gun to her head and told the cops that, hey, everything's good, I don't need to go forward with anything? Very possible. She could have came back into law enforcement after the fact and said, hey, I don't mean anything that I just said to you. I was under duress. He was threatening my life. I had to call you. But for reasons that we don't know, I can't ask Brenda now, it doesn't appear that she did that. But after all this transpired, Brenda decided it was time to move forward with the divorce, and she also planned to file for legal custody of the kids, who are now 5 and almost 1 years old. And her first meeting with her lawyer was scheduled for July 30th. But somehow, Raymond found out about this meeting, and around July 23rd, he refused to bring the children back to Brenda after a visit. And according to Oxygen, he told her, quote, "You'll see me dead before you take my kids." But Brenda had leverage. She told Raymond that if he didn't return the kids, she would go to the police and tell them the things she knew about him and his family, things that, according to her, would put them in prison for the rest of their lives. Now, that leverage has never been made public, but whatever it is, it worked, because Raymond brought the kids back, at least for a little while. On July 26th, Brenda hosted a home birthday party for her and Raymond's son, who was turning 1 year old. It began around 4 or 5 p.m., and several family members were there to celebrate. Raymond and his mother both attended the party, along with Brenda's mother and her 3 sisters, including Christy. At one point, Brenda's cousin Tammy showed up uninvited, and according to Christy, she kept giving Brenda, quote, an evil look, which made things at the party very tense. Brenda and Raymond went out onto the porch to argue about who invited her, and Raymond said he had nothing to do with it. He denied any involvement, but understandably, Brenda didn't believe him. And no one else would admit to inviting Tammy, and the situation left Brenda upset and in a bad mood. Still, she tried to hold it together for the sake of her son's birthday, and you can see from a couple of the photos on the screen now, this is from that actual birthday party. In these photos, Brenda is not happy. You can see her having conversations. She's in the yellow shirt there, and yeah, she's pissed off, understandably so. At around 9 p.m., guests began heading out, and Brenda asked Raymond if she could keep the children overnight, but he refused. Brenda then went to her driveway and walked from vehicle to vehicle asking if anyone could stay with her for the night, but everyone turned her down, and according to Christy, Brenda seemed like she was in a really bad mood, and most of the family figured she just needed some space to cool off. So I understand where they're coming from. It's a really hostile environment. Brenda's upset. They know Brenda. They know she just has to blow off some steam. We've all been there. You don't want to sit there for the rest of the night just so your family member or loved one can vent to you. So they're like, nah, you know what? I'm good. If you need me tomorrow, I'll be around, but I don't want to get involved with this tonight. We're heading home. Now, in hindsight, as we continue to go through the story, I'm sure Christy and the rest of her family, if they had the chance to do it over again, someone would have stayed. But just like all of us, you're not expecting that this could happen to you. So when you think about this case and you think about the different forks in the road, don't judge it from the perspective of knowing what happened at the end. Put yourself in those shoes and ask how you would handle it. And I think most of you, if you're being honest with yourself, would probably do something similar. So yeah, she asked for people to stay. Nobody did. So Brenda was going to be home alone. So the last people to leave were Raymond, his mother, and both of the kids. Then at around 11 p.m., Raymond showed up at the home of Brenda's sister, Kat. According to Kat, he looked like he had seen a ghost. He was visibly shaking and said he couldn't find Brenda. She wasn't at the house when he returned after the party, and he didn't explain why he went back, only that she was gone. And we are just getting started in this story. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. When was the last time you needed to go to the doctor, but you pushed it off? Made the excuse, I'm too busy, it'll heal on its own, or I just don't know which doctor to go to. I think we've all been there. Booking a doctor's appointment can be frustrating, but thanks to ZocDoc, there's no reason to delay. They make it easy to find and book a top-rated doctor that's right for you. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. And we're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, primary care to urgent care, and much more. You can even filter for doctors who take your insurance, are located nearby, are a good fit for any medical need you may have, and are highly rated by verified patients. Appointments made through ZocDoc also happen fast, typically within 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/detective to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/detective. One more time, ZocDoc.com/detective. All right, we're back. So Raymond shows up at Kat's house. He says he can't find Brenda. He had went back to the house after the party and she wasn't there. Doesn't explain why he went back to the house, just says, hey, she's gone. So Kat says, yeah, I haven't seen her or heard from her. So at that point, Raymond leaves. And the next day, Brenda's mother, Maggie, tried calling Brenda as well. And when she couldn't get a hold of her, she drove to Brenda's house, but Brenda wasn't there. Her car was still parked in the driveway, but the front door was locked. So at that point, Maggie went back to her home and started calling everyone she could think of, but no one had seen or heard from Brenda. It was completely out of character for her to just disappear, and Maggie knew something was wrong. She kept going back to Brenda's house, hoping that maybe she'd return, but there was still no sign of her. Maggie tried to report Brenda missing, but the police told her that Brenda had to be missing for 48 hours before she could file a police report. They also let her know that they wouldn't take the report from anyone other than Brenda's husband, which, as we know, was Raymond. So, knowing everything we know now, probably not the best person we want filing the police report, especially if he's somehow involved. Now, once the 48 hours passed, surprisingly, Raymond did report 22-year-old Brenda missing. And according to the family, he didn't put up a fight and he actually seemed very willing to make the report, but I'm not taking too much out of that. I'm not sitting here going, oh, well, if he's willing to file the report, then clearly he's not involved. In fact, I'm thinking the opposite. And I'm sure most of you watching or listening right now are probably coming to a similar conclusion. So yeah, I don't put much stock in the fact that he was willing to be cooperative and file a report for his missing estranged wife. It means nothing to me as far as the overall scope of this case and who might be involved. So here's the interesting part. Raymond goes in, he files the police report, and then he tells detectives that he had left Brenda's house after the party and went straight to his mother's home. He then said that he didn't return to Brenda's house until the next day at 2:30 p.m., and then that's when he realized she was gone. But as you know, because I just told you, that's not what he told Brenda's sister Kat when he showed up to her house at 11 p.m. When he goes there and says, hey, I just went back to the house after the party and she wasn't home. So again, just to go back to what I said, him filing the report doesn't really sway me one way or another, but him lying to law enforcement when we know that he was already aware Brenda was missing the night before, that is a red flag to me. After the report was made, the police arrived at Brenda's house to conduct a welfare check. Several of Brenda's sisters and Tammy met the officers there. They found that the door was still locked and no one had a key, so they couldn't get in. That's when Tammy stepped up and said, "Hey, I know another way in. There's a second-story window that doesn't lock." So she climbed up and then went through the window and then unlocked the door from the inside so everyone could enter. Now, I want you to pause right here and digest everything I just said. There's going to be more details about this and it may change your opinion, but stop right now for a second and let me know what you think of this. First off, Tammy being there when there's a lot of speculation that she's having an affair with Brenda's husband. That's a whole weird dynamic that I guess we can save for another day. But the fact that she knew about this window when no one else did, because apparently her sisters didn't suggest, hey, there's that window upstairs that doesn't lock. It was Tammy. So what do you think about this? Is this suspicious to you? Is this something that needs to be investigated further? Hold that thought, write it down, weigh in down in the comments if you're on YouTube. Let me know. Let me know what you think at this point. However, whatever you think right now, based on some of the things I still have to tell you, that opinion may change. So now everybody's in the house, and in the upstairs bedroom, they found that items had been thrown around and clothes were scattered all over the floor. Brenda's shoes, yellow shirt, and blue shorts, the exact outfit she was wearing during the party, the ones that are in the same photos if you just saw them, were all found by the bathroom door as if she had changed out of them immediately after the party. However, I want to note that her underwear and bra were missing. In fact, when officers took a closer look, they realized that all of Brenda's bras and underwear were gone. Christy said she didn't know what to make of that, but it seemed like someone might have wanted to give the impression or staged the scene to make it look like Brenda had packed in a hurry. Officers continued searching, and Brenda's purse and car keys were found tucked inside a toy box in the bathroom, which Brenda had been remodeling. Now, Christy believes that Brenda may have hidden her purse from Raymond because she didn't want him to take her license or her money during the party, which would cause her not to be able to meet with the divorce attorney later that week. But there was something else that was surprising. There was a suitcase sitting next to the front door. Now, Christy can't remember if there were clothes inside, but either way, it stood out. She believes that whoever was responsible for Brenda's disappearance wanted to make it seem like she had left on her own and planned to take the suitcase with her, but for some reason, forgot in all of the chaos of trying to leave the house in a hurry. Now, let's quickly unpack what we have here, what was just described. Because to me, my personal and professional opinion is that whoever did this wasn't very bright because they contradicted themselves in the staging, right? You threw clothes all over the place to make it look like she was packing in a hurry, and you probably took out the suitcase and thought maybe I should pack it with some clothes and take it with me so people say later, oh, her suitcase is missing. But for some strange reason, whoever this Einstein is, they decided that it would be more believable if they left the suitcase at the door. Because if you were running out of a house and you were taking off with your personal items, you would definitely forget the thing that you have to put those items in. But let's leave it at the door because if the clothes being scattered all over the place aren't enough, just a random suitcase sitting at the door is going to be the nail in the coffin of the theory that she ran off without anybody knowing where she was going. Real good job there. So yeah, I hope, although I haven't spoken to them personally, I hope law enforcement saw through this. And as we continue to go through this story, I think you will see that, yeah, they weren't buying what whoever was selling. But with everything the family knew so far, from the staging of the house to her just kind of dropping off the map, it was deeply troubling because Brenda would have never left her children behind, especially not with someone who had hurt her. And nothing at the scene made sense. If she truly left, why would she leave her purse? Why would she leave her car? And again, the suitcase. If you're going to pack up and go somewhere, how are you carrying it if you don't have a car? It doesn't make any sense. Now, I do want to mention that there are some reports that law enforcement used luminol in the house to detect any blood, and apparently nothing was found. Again, I haven't been able to substantiate it, but I want to mention it because if it's true, I think it's pretty important. If there's no sign of struggle inside the house, it could mean that Brenda was forced to leave against her will. And I bring this up because we have an earlier account where Brenda was forced to do something that she didn't want to do because she had a gun to her head. Who was that person? It was Raymond. And who was the person to report her missing only hours after the party? Raymond. So not good when we're trying to figure out what had happened and who could potentially be involved. What do I always say? Best predictor of future behavior, past behavior? That could be the case here. And speaking of our buddy Raymond, he was initially looked at as a suspect, but he has always claimed he had nothing to do with her disappearance. And when detectives asked where he thought Brenda had gone, he said he believed she had run off with another man. They also questioned him about his relationship with Tammy, but Raymond was vague and evasive. He insisted that he and Tammy were just friends. I wish this was the first story where we heard the main suspect in this case accusing the missing wife as the person who was doing the cheating. And as far as him being evasive about he and Tammy's relationship, you could understand why he would want to do that because that could potentially be a motive. But that lie didn't last for long because on July 31st, Tammy came forward to speak with detectives. She fully admitted that not only were she and Raymond dating, but they had been doing so for several months. She also mentioned that Raymond had given her a gun for protection just in case Brenda tried to come after her. How nice of Raymond to do that for Tammy. And it's interesting because Raymond seems to have a lot of guns hanging around. So you may be hearing all of this and thinking, wow, maybe Tammy's deciding to do the right thing. Maybe she knows that something's not adding up and she's turning on Raymond. Well, not so fast, because within a few days of this interview that she did with detectives, she moved into the house on Route 7, the same house that Brenda had shared with Raymond and her children. And later, Tammy and Raymond got married while living there. Now, I do want to point out, for not only karma purposes, but also for evidentiary reasons, if we ever wanted to go back there, it's been reported that this house actually burned down in 1998 due to an accidental fire. Now, I don't know what the details of that fire are, but again, if we wanted to go back to that house now, unfortunately, we would be unable to do so. But let's rewind before the fire, because after Brenda disappeared, her children continued to see her side of the family. Raymond did not prevent any of those visits, and Christy, who was just 14 at the time, remembers spending a lot of time with them. But as years passed, those relationships started to fade. As Christy and other members of the family started to suspect Raymond had something to do with Brenda's disappearance, they found it harder to maintain contact. Christy said she didn't want to believe it at first, but once she did, she couldn't keep pretending. She couldn't be around her niece and nephew and act like everything was okay. While Raymond and Tammy built a life together in Brenda's home and raised Brenda's children, the investigation into Brenda's disappearance continued, but very little progress was made. Christy believes that detectives may have taken Raymond at his word, assuming that Brenda had simply run off with another man, but her family never believed that was true. Over the years, rumors began to surface. People in the area claimed that Raymond and his father had been at a remote, secluded sawmill the night Brenda disappeared. The sawmill was owned by the Lambert family and was located just down the road from their mountain property. Despite those rumors, the sawmill was never searched, and neither was Raymond's parents' house or the surrounding property. And from what I can tell, police just believed they didn't have enough to obtain a search warrant. Now, whether that's true or not, how do you really know unless you go in front of a judge? Don't kill the messenger here. I would have tried, but apparently they didn't, or maybe they did, and behind closed doors, a judge looked at it and said, yeah, you know what? Unless you got more than this, I'm not signing it. We just don't know for certain what really transpired. And one more thing about this sawmill that I wanted to note, and again, this is just a rumor at this point because it's on private property, so we have no way of confirming it, but apparently the sawmill might have burned down as well. So as we go forward and we get into the perspective later, I'm not going to mention going back to Brenda's house or the sawmill because I don't even know if it's still erected anymore. I think I would want to find out, before completely ruling it out. But as I sit here right now, there's a strong potential that the two main crime scenes that I would want to look at, even all these years later, they may no longer exist. As far as the search warrant's concerned, because I'm sure some of you are going to be in the comments saying that's crazy that they didn't try for one. And I do agree with you, but I will say, just to be fair, it's not that easy to get a search warrant, especially depending on the judge. And every judge is different. And I've had to get hundreds of search warrants signed, mostly for narcotics. But you need probable cause. It can't just be a rumor. It can't just be speculation. You need to be able to paint a picture where you say, hey, we believe that a crime occurred at property A, and that potentially the suspects transferred some evidence to property B. So we need a search warrant to go check that out and see if that's the case. But it can't just be an anonymous source. It can't just be a rumor. The judge is never going to sign that. You normally would need a witness or a confidential informant. And if it's a confidential informant, I know with my narcotics cases, I would always have to articulate in that search warrant that the confidential informant who is providing the information for the search warrant, they have been involved in a case before where the information they provided resulted in a conviction, which gives them credibility. I have to sign as the affiant testifying to that under oath in front of the judge. So if they're just hearing from Joe Smo at the gas station who doesn't want to go on record, that's not going to be enough to get a search warrant. So is it the hardest thing to get? No. But if you don't have anything to go off of, you might be shit out of luck when it comes to getting a judge to sign off on it. Now, as the years went by, Brenda's daughter Krista reached a point where she wanted to reconnect with her mother's side of the family. It had been many years since she had spoken to her aunts, including Christy, but she had to do it quietly because she didn't want her father to know what she had to say. We're going to take a quick break, but you want to stick around because what she relays to Brenda's family could tell us exactly what happened on the night that Brenda disappeared. We'll be right back. So the next thing I want to talk to you about isn't actually an ad. It goes more in line with what we're doing here on Detective Perspective, and I think it could be a great resource for some of you out there. When I first started at the police department, I had an officer who trained me. His name was, at the time, Patrolman Dorian Rave, and Dorian Rave became a sergeant and was eventually my patrol sergeant, and then became a lieutenant and was eventually the lieutenant of narcotics, which I was in. But most importantly, Dorian Rave became a very good friend of mine. I owe a lot of what I accomplished in my law enforcement career to Dorian. And although we're no longer on the police department together, I consider him family. And we've both gone on to do different things. Obviously, I'm taking this lane. And he has now recently become the director of the Rhode Island Crime Victim Compensation Program. And you're probably sitting there asking yourself, what is that? Well, if you or someone you love has been the victim of a violent crime, your state's Crime Victim Compensation Program may be able to help you ease some of those financial burdens during an incredibly difficult time. This program is designed to support victims by covering certain expenses related to the crime, including relocation costs, funeral and burial expenses, medical bills, mental health counseling, loss of support, and other crime-related costs. And here's the best part. This isn't only just in Rhode Island where Dorian works. Every U.S. state and territory has an agency dedicated to crime victim compensation, partially funded by the Victim of Crimes Act through formula grants. So if you have any questions about this program in your state, check out the Office for Victims of Crime at the website listed right here on the screen. I'll also have it in the description on the audio podcast. I'm not going to spell it all out. It's a very long link, and I want to make sure we get it right. So again, if you're on YouTube, it's on the screen right now. It's in the description. And if you're listening on audio, just open up your phone and it'll be right in the description there as well. Now, if you are in Rhode Island, the Crime Victims Compensation Program is administered by the Office of the General Treasurer. And to qualify for the program, the crime must have occurred within the state. It must be reported to law enforcement within 15 days, and the victim must be fully cooperative with the investigation. So just remember, for everybody, whether you're in Rhode Island or another state within this country, support is out there. Please do not hesitate to reach out. All right, let's dive right back in because, as I said before the break, what Krista said to the family could really shed light on what happened to Brenda. So Krista tells Christy that growing up, Raymond had always claimed Brenda left the family for another man, but Krista never believed him. And the reason she never believed him was because Krista had seen something that night, something that she would never forget. Krista said that she had personally witnessed her father dragging Brenda across his parents' backyard the night she disappeared. She immediately told her grandmother what she had seen, but her grandmother told her it was just a bad dream and urged her to go back to sleep. When Krista recounted the story to Christy, she said, quote, "I know for a fact I wasn't dreaming." Krista also opened up about what life was like growing up with Tammy as her stepmother. She said she wasn't allowed to say Brenda's name or even talk about her at all. And when Krista had pictures of her mother in her room, Tammy would come in and slam them face down. So this goes back to what I was saying to you guys earlier, right? Remember when it looked like Tammy may be turning a corner and maybe she might be seeing what's going on here? Yeah. If we're to believe what Krista's telling us here, that wasn't the case. And that wasn't the only information that Krista relayed to Brenda's family. She also shared that at one point, Tammy asked Raymond right in front of the children, quote, "Why don't you tell them what really happened to their mommy?" Krista went on to say that Raymond responded by hitting Tammy with a weapon, so not surprising based on what we've learned about Tammy and Raymond up to this point. Now, for everyone who's asking, because I'm sure you're in the comments right now, Krista did eventually go to the police, though it's unclear exactly what she shared with them. But what we do know is that she also wrote everything down on paper and gave a copy to Brenda's family to hold on to. So we still do have that. The investigation into Brenda's disappearance continued, and in 2006, the Mercer County Sheriff's Office announced that they believed her case might be connected to another disappearance in the Bluewell area, that of Brenda's friend, Mark Cook. Now, Mark disappeared just under 6 months after Brenda, and the story behind his disappearance is that around 3 a.m., on January 14th, 1993, he was last seen in Brush Fork, a small town just 3 miles from Bluefield. And when you look on a map, Bluefield and Bluewell are not the same thing. From what I can tell, and for anybody from West Virginia, feel free to correct me. You have, if you're watching on, visually here, it would make more sense. If not, I'll try to describe it. It's only about an 8 to 10 minute drive from Bluefield to Bluewell, and Brush Fork is somewhere in the middle. So a very close distance. I'm not mispronouncing it. Bluefield is different than Bluewell. So now that you have a little bit of an understanding of the layout and where everything's located, on the night of the disappearance, Mark went to this place called Pedro's, which was this popular nightclub that he had gone to before, even with Brenda. They would go there sometimes, and that's where they would dance. Now, the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unclear, but Christy told the Princeton Times that she had heard Mark, quote, went to Pedro's and supposedly asked someone about Brenda and got beat up and thrown out. Witnesses said that Mark left Pedro's and was last seen walking toward US Route 52. After that, he just vanished. Not long after Mark's disappearance, detectives received a tip that claimed Brenda and Mark had been dating and that they had run off together to start a new life, which to me doesn't really make a lot of sense because, as I said, Brenda took off and it wasn't until 6 months later that Mark disappeared. And although I can't completely rule it out, I don't have anything definitive to say this isn't possible. I'm not buying it based on the research that I've done, and I'll also say that neither of the families believe this story. Christy acknowledged that Mark may have had a crush on Brenda, and there may have been some light flirting, but they were not romantically involved. They had known each other since high school and had remained friends, but that was it. As far as what we know, it was a platonic relationship, and it never went further than that. In 2006, when the sheriff's office said they believed the two disappearances were related, they didn't explain exactly why, but they did say they believed that foul play was involved in both cases. And Christy agrees that foul play was definitely involved in Brenda's case. She believes that Brenda was killed after the birthday party on July 26, 1992, and that her body was buried at the Lambert family sawmill. She told WOAY, quote, Brenda was murdered and Brenda was hidden on a property very close to here. I mean, everybody knows it and everybody knows who. The investigation into both cases continued, but Mark and Brenda were never found. Still, Christy never stopped searching, and in 2016, she actually submitted her DNA to a national database, hoping for a match with an unidentified Jane Doe, but no matches were ever found. Then in 2020, Christy's family suffered another devastating loss. Brenda's daughter, Krista, passed away after carrying the weight of her mother's disappearance for her entire life. But after Krista's death, Christy became even more determined to find answers. 2 years later, the prosecuting attorney contacted Christy and asked her to begin the legal process of declaring Brenda deceased. More than 30 years had passed since Brenda was last seen or heard from. She had never tried to contact her family or children. Her social security number had never been used again, and there had been no verified sightings. Christy knew the process wouldn't be easy emotionally, but she agreed to do it. She already knew that Brenda was gone, but having the court acknowledge it brought a measure of validation and confirmed what the family had long believed. Christy further hoped that by having Brenda declared dead, it would lead to murder charges in Brenda's case. She told the Bluefield Daily Telegraph, quote, "This may be the only closure that we ever get." Unfortunately, no charges were ever filed. In 2023, Cold Justice, a TV show featuring Kelly Sigler, an attorney and former Texas prosecutor working with a team of investigators, aired an episode about Brenda's disappearance. While filming, the team interviewed Christy and her younger brother. They also spoke to none other than Tammy, who at this point was no longer married to Raymond. What a shocker, right? She claimed that before Brenda disappeared, Raymond told her that there was, quote, "no way" he'd let Brenda take his house and his kids. Tammy said that after Brenda disappeared, she believed, at first, that Brenda had run off. But over the years, as Brenda's mother passed away and her children reached major life milestones, the story became harder to believe. She admitted that she didn't ask questions, though, because Raymond was physically abusive and had strangled her on more than one occasion. And what I found to be the most compelling piece of information that came out of this interview was that she had heard from Raymond's sister that Raymond and his father were at the sawmill the night Brenda disappeared, just like the rumor suggested. Now, as part of the episode, investigators also went to Raymond's house to see if he would talk to them, and to their surprise, he did. But of course, he denied any involvement with Brenda's disappearance, and when he was asked whether his family still owned the sawmill property and whether investigators could search it, he avoided giving them a straight answer. No shock there. So after conducting all of these interviews and reviewing all available information, the team behind Cold Justice and the local sheriff's office agreed that Raymond had both the motive and the opportunity in Brenda's suspected murder. However, even with all of this, no charges were ever filed, and Brenda has never been found. But Christy hasn't stopped searching, and she definitely hasn't stopped fighting, and she's made it very clear that she'll keep going for as long as it takes. All right, let's dive into this perspective and elaborate on some of the things I said, and I'm going to focus more in this perspective on where we go from here, because I feel like I really did elaborate in the episode on certain things, but I want to talk about what we can do at this point in 2025. First off, I told you guys about search warrants, and I said we need probable cause. Well, a rumor or just a random person who's not willing to come forward saying something that connects back to the sawmill is not going to get the job done. However, if you are able to track down Raymond's sister and she's willing to put pen to paper, if you get a statement from her, to me, and I'm not a judge, if you write that up the right way in a search warrant, I think it gives you more than enough probable cause to at least search the property. And again, we're not talking about an arrest, we're talking about a search. And so the threshold is much lower, right? We're just looking for the right to go onto the property as law enforcement officials and search around to see if we find any evidence that could indicate a crime. We're not arresting Raymond, and we're not arresting his father, although I'm not even sure if he's still alive at this point. So that's number one. I would try to track down Raymond's sister, see if there's some validity to what's been said, and see if she's willing to write a statement. If she's willing to do so, then I would take that in conjunction with what Krista wrote down and relayed to Brenda's family. That's a little bit more of a slippery slope because Krista's no longer here, so the argument could be made that did she ever write that up at all, or did someone write it up for her? But that's when I would go back to law enforcement and see what Krista told them during her interview, because the hope is that in addition to writing it all down, she also relayed the same information to whatever detective interviewed her at that time. If you have Krista's statement to a police officer and you potentially have Raymond's sister giving a similar statement, both indicating that Brenda was on the Lambert property, we got to be able to get a search warrant for that. I don't see how a judge would not sign off on that. So that's number one. If we're able to do that, you do a grid search, you search the property and see if there's anything that stands out to you or one of the other officers, or maybe you bring in canines and drones because, again, we have that technology now where you scan the area. Maybe you use ground penetrating radar to see if there's any disturbances in the soil that may suggest a burial site. Trust me, they have the capabilities of doing it. Even all these years later, it's 3 decades. I know it's a long time, but if there's something there with what we have and the capabilities at our disposal now, there's a real chance that depending on how much work and resources are put into it, they could find something if it was left on that property and it wasn't hidden very well. The problem we run into is if it was burned. If there was a fire that took place and all evidence was destroyed, we may be out of luck. So if we do go to the property and worst case scenario, we do not find anything that links back to Brenda. Okay, is that a dead end? No, absolutely not. I've said it before, but if you haven't seen those episodes, I'll say it again. There is a thing called an investigative grand jury. And essentially what that is it's a jury made up of your peers. The prosecution will go in there and present a case against someone. In this case, it would be Raymond. And they would put all the facts that they have, whatever they have, which would include the night events leading up to it, and then what was relayed to Brenda's family and law enforcement by Krista, and then potentially what Tammy has to share and what Raymond's sister has to share. All of that in totality, it would be heard by this jury, and then they would decide if there was enough to indict Raymond. If they decided to indict him, it would go to trial and it would play out, and we would see what happens. What's the downfall here? There's none. 30 years into it, you really have nothing to lose. The problem is if you convene this investigative grand jury and they come back and say there's not enough, unless you have something come out like a confession or physical evidence that shows definitively that he did this, you might not be able to do it again. It's a one-shot deal and you're done. You normally can't go back and try this person again as far as the investigative grand jury is concerned. There are certain cases where it's been done, and my lawyers on this episode that are watching this or listening, please weigh in down in the comments and specify what I got wrong here, if anything. But it's very difficult to go back and do it again. So you run the risk of going after him, not having that concrete evidence and having him walk. But my argument to you would be, how is that any different than what we have right now? He's been walking around for over 30 years. He hasn't answered for anything if he is in fact responsible for this. And I will say, based on everything that I've heard here, he had the means, motive, opportunity. There doesn't appear to be any other suspects. It doesn't look like Brenda ran off with any man or ran off on her own. And based on the fact that he lied about when he actually went back to the house, that right there to me is a big red flag and a big tell. So that's where I would go with this. It's pretty simple. It's pretty short and sweet, but that's what we have. There's no concrete evidence here, but I do think we have a story. And if you tell it the right way and you support it with some witness testimony, like I said, from Tammy, from Brenda's family, from Raymond's family, anybody who's willing to come forward on that, maybe you have something there. Maybe you have something. It's a long shot, but at this point, what do you have to lose? So I would say that's where I would start. And then as always, you put up the billboard, you spread the flyers, you keep the awareness up. And maybe someone comes forward who saw something or heard something at the time, but just hasn't been incentivized enough to come forward yet. For one reason or another, they didn't feel it was appropriate for them to do so. But I'm hoping that if they continue to see Brenda's face up on a billboard, maybe that will change their mind. So this next part is, as always, in every episode is a recap for that person who may still be out there. So just to recap, Brenda Gail Lambert was last seen on July 26, 1992 at her home off Route 7, also known as Windmill Hill Road in Bluewell, West Virginia. She was 5'2" and weighed approximately 110 pounds. Brenda had shoulder-length black curly hair and dark blue eyes. If you have any information about Brenda's disappearance, please contact the Mercer County Sheriff's Office at 304-487-8364. And it does sound to me, at least on the surface, that this department is motivated. They were willing to let a show come in and look at the case and let outside eyes and ears take a look at what they have. So that's a good sign to me. They're looking for that piece of the puzzle that's going to crack this case wide open. Let's help them find it. And my final words, as always, go out to Brenda's friends and family, specifically Christy, for not only allowing me to tell your sister's story, but also being involved in the creation of this episode to make sure that we have all the facts straight. Your drive and determination to find out what happened to your sister is inspiring, and you continuing to be a voice for her when she can no longer speak for herself is what it's going to take to solve this case. And I know that me and everybody watching or listening to this episode, we're right there with you. And we're hoping that you have answers very soon and that the person in this case is held accountable. Until then, I'll see you guys next week. Everyone stay safe out there. Have a good night.